don't know about you guys, but it felt like a very interesting week, right? Bud and I were reflecting on it, and it was kind of funny because we spent the week sort of like watching the possible crumbling of our democracy on a platform that is currently crumbling, which is Twitter. So there was something really poetic about our week. I don't know about you guys, but Amanda. All right. Do we do it? Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay. So Jesus and the disciples are in Jerusalem. They're at the temple. And here's where we pick up. It's Luke 21, verses 5 through 19. When some were speaking at the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he, Jesus, said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will all this be? And what will be the sign that it is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first. But the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you the words, and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." Good news this morning. Just kidding. We open this passage with the disciples. They're in awe of the temple. And this structure has been like the center of their faith and a symbol of God's presence among the community, the Jewish community, and they're marveling at its beauty. And by all historical accounts, it truly was a beautiful sight to see. So the disciples are rightly impressed by the grandeur that they're witnessing in the temple at Jerusalem. And Jesus' response to their admiration that borders on worship is to tell them that this is all fleeting. That this building with its precious stones and grandeur, which seems immovable, will one day crumble. And no stone, no proof that it existed, will remain. This is devastating news. See, we have to remember what the temple symbolizes for the Jewish community. Among many other things, we're going to take a slight historical detour. The original temple was already destroyed once by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and it was this final blow for an exiled community. And this rebuilding was an important project. It was a statement that signified that the Jewish people, despite all odds, have survived. The new temple is their proof. The identity of the Jewish community is bound up in this place, in this building, in this structure, with all of its beauty. And even though the disciples knew that the corrupt systems existed around the temple, and even though Jesus, just a few chapters before this, cleansed the temple, there was still hope that the sacred place could be redeemed. So when we consider this, the disciples' response seems quite reasonable, actually. Jesus, when will this destruction happen? How long do we have? What will be the signs? What will help us know that the time is drawing near? You could almost hear the, when will we endure another traumatic event for our people? And Jesus lays out some chaos. But I actually don't want to focus on that too much today, or at all, really, because it would be really easy to delve into the details and show how each of the things that Jesus listed actually was fulfilled before the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. Or we could talk about all of these signs and the way they point towards the end times that we're witnessing today in our culture, the wars and rumors of wars, the natural disasters, the plagues, the pandemics, the division. Do I need to spell it out, really? But buried in all of this chaos, we have words of comfort from Jesus, if we want to choose to see that and hear that. See, the hope for the Jewish community is wrapped up in the temple at Jerusalem. And even with the abuses of power, there was hope for redemption. And the disciples knew that they would play a key role in the redemptive story. And a lot of the chaos was going to happen with the result that the temple won't be redeemed. It will crumble. But Jesus reminds them of something else. In the midst of the chaos, the disciples will find their voices. They will have the opportunity to testify. They'll learn that the presence of God resides within them, not in the temple. Jesus' presence follows them wherever they go, so they can stand firm. See, I think sometimes we forget the significance of the creation story in Genesis. I think we get distracted by questions about whether or not we should take this really beautiful poem literally. Is it scientific? What are we supposed to do with it? Or another way to handle it is just to skip over it and jump right to the fall and focus on our total depravity. And we completely miss one of the important things that the creation story really does for us. And among many other things, this story is about God creating a place of worship. The whole earth is God's temple. And like other places of worship in the ancient Near East, the temple houses the image of God. But what makes God's temple different is that image of God is not in a stone statue that can crumble, that can fall. No, the image that God chooses to create for themselves is humanity. We, humanity, contain the breath of God's life. We are the image bearers. We contain the presence of God. And we have always carried the presence of God within each of us. It was not meant to be contained within a temple. It was always meant to move with the people. So I want to keep that in mind as we read the last few verses of this passage in the First Nations translation, because I think it pulls out some interesting things. I'm going to start in verse 13. But remember, this will be your chance to represent me and tell them the good story. Do not worry about what to say ahead of time to defend yourselves, for I will give you the mouth of a wisdom keeper, and no enemy will be able to answer you or prove you wrong. You will be betrayed by your own family members and friends. They will even have some of you killed. They will hate you because you are representing me and my teachings. But none of these things can truly harm you. So you must stand up strong and never give up trusting me. For my life inside you will help you walk with firm steps. For my life inside you will help you walk with firm steps. Notice the way this translation speaks not only of testifying, but of telling the story of God. How the disciples will be wisdom keepers. How they'll carry the life of Jesus within themselves. No longer is the presence of God, the stories, the wisdom to be found only in this structure. The presence, the very breath of God is and always has been housed within the people. So when the structures that they've been placing their identities in fall, they're able to stand firm. Because they are the wisdom keepers. They carry the story and the presence of God within themselves. And I believe these words of comfort are still relevant for us today. We need to be reminded of where we place our identity and where we place our hope. Have we chosen to place our identities in structures that fade or eventually fall? Let's take a few minutes to evaluate this question. Have we placed our hope and trust in government structures? Do we acknowledge that there are abuses of power that exist in this structure, but the structure itself can be redeemed? One way to evaluate this is to reflect on last week's midterm election. They could have been better, but they could have been way worse. But is that where we place our identity? Or are we still hopeful even after those results rolled in? Is it in our belief systems, our orthodoxy and dogmas? Do we find ourselves acknowledging that there are beliefs that have led to abuses of power, but systems of beliefs can be redeemed? Have we concluded that the way we believe is the only right way and the other ways of seeing the world are wrong? One way to evaluate this is to reflect on how we respond when someone disagrees with us. Are we immediately defensive, or are we curious? Is it in our productivity? Do we place our identity in what we contribute to our families, our society, our communities? Do we acknowledge that certain paths of productivity lead to abuses of power, but the system of productivity can be redeemed? Are we always and only tied up in what we do? One way to evaluate this is to take a Sabbath or consider taking a Sabbath. Imagine doing nothing that might be considered productive for 24 hours, and imagine how that might make you feel. Maybe it's none of these. Maybe you place your identity in some other structure, in some other system that you believe could be redeemed if given the chance. And so Jesus' words to the disciples are the same for us as fellow followers in Christ. These structures will fail. They will crumble until there's no evidence of them. Not one stone will remain. And all of these structures will fall. The ones we see problematic and the ones we desperately cling to. And as we stand firm, we'll come face to face with violence. There will be those who will not agree. They'll call us heretics and drag us before the court of public opinion. There will be justification of violence. And maybe you think I'm being overly dramatic, but as a historian, it has happened in the past, and it is primed to happen again. We will experience the chaos of wars. We are experiencing the chaos of wars. Destruction, pandemics, plagues, and natural disasters. And yet, in the midst of all of it, there will be opportunities to use our voices, to tell our stories, to tell the story of God's faithfulness to all people, the story of the radical love and acceptance of Jesus, the story of the Spirit who breathes new life into all things. And this truth doesn't dismiss the very real pain and suffering that we endure, but it will redeem it. It will be our voices, our stories, our embodied testimonies of God's redemptive love. We're living testimonies of the divine. When all of the structures that we've placed our hope and identities in crumble, we will stand firm. Why? Because, not to sound too much like a broken record, but the presence of God resides not in those fallible structures, but within each of us. God's divine spark resides in each of us. I want us to sit with that truth for just a few moments. What might that mean for the way that we go about the business of life? What might internalizing that truth mean as we interact with fellow image bearers of God?